Introduction by J. Ottema, who translated the original Frisian text into Dutch. C. Oera Linda, Chief Superintendent of the Royal Dockyard at the Helder, possesses a very ancient manuscript, which has been inherited and preserved in his family from time immemorial, without anyone knowing whence it came or what it contained, owing to both the language and the writing being unknown. All that was known was that a tradition contained in it had from generation to generation been recommended to careful preservation. It appeared that the tradition rests upon the contents of 2 letters, with which the manuscript begins, from Hido Oera Linda, anno 1256, and from Lico Oera Linda, anno 803. It came to C. Oera Linda by the directions of his grandfather, Dean Heer Andries Oera Linda, who lived at Enkhuizen and died there on the 15th of April, 1820, aged 61. As the grandson was at that time barely 10 years old, the manuscript was taken care of for him by his aunt, Afje Meelhof, born Oera Linda, living at Enkhuizen, who in August 1848 delivered it to the present possessor. Dr. E. Verwijs, having heard of this, requested permission to examine the manuscript and immediately recognized it as very ancient Fries. Dr. E. Verwijs, having heard of this, requested permission to examine the manuscript and immediately recognized it as very ancient Fries. He obtained at the same time permission to make a copy of it for the benefit of the Friesland Society, and was of opinion that it might be of great importance, provided it was not supposititious and invented for some deceptive object, which he feared. The manuscript being placed in my hands, I also felt very doubtful, though I could not understand what object any one could have in inventing a false composition only to keep it a secret. This doubt remained until I had examined carefully executed facsimiles of 2 fragments, and afterwards of the whole manuscript, the first sight of which convinced me of the great age of the document. Immediately occurred to me Caesar's remarks upon the writings of the Gauls and the Helvetians in his Bello Gallico, I-29 and VI-14. Graecis utuntur litteris, though it appears in V-48 that they were not entirely Greek letters. Caesar thus points out only a resemblance, and a very true one, as the writing, which does not altogether correspond with any known form of letters, resembles the most, on a cursory view, the Greek writing, such as is found on monuments and the oldest manuscripts, and belongs to the form which is called lapidary. Besides, I formed the opinion afterwards that the writer of the latter part of the book had been a contemporary of Caesar. The form and the origin of the writing is so minutely and fully described in the first part of the book, as it could not be in any other language. It is very complete and consists of 34 letters, among which are 3 separate forms of A and U, and 2 of E, I, Y, and O, besides 4 pairs of double consonants, ng, th, th, and gz. The ng, which as a nasal sound has no particular mark in any other Western language, is an indivisible conjunction. The th is soft, as in English, and is sometimes replaced by d, and gz, gs, is seldom met with. I believe only in the word segze, to say in modern Fries sidze, pronounced Caesar. sizze. The paper, of large quarto size, is made of cotton, not very thick, without watermark or maker's mark, made upon a frame or wire web, with not very broad perpendicular lines. An introductory letter gives the year 1256 as that in which this manuscript was written by Oera Linda on foreign paper. Consequently, it must have come from Spain, where the Arabs brought into the market paper manufactured from cotton. On this subject, W. Wattenbach writes in his Das Schriftwesen im Mittelalter, Leipzig, 1871, S. 93. The manufacture of paper from cotton must have been in use among the Chinese from very remote times and must have become known to the Arabs by the conquest of Samarkand about the year 704. In Damascus, this manufacture was an important branch of industry, for which reason it was called Charta Damascena. By the Arabians, this art was brought to the Greeks. It is asserted that Greek manuscripts of the 10th century written upon cotton paper exist, and that in the 13th century it was much more used than parchment. To distinguish it from Egyptian paper, it was called Charta Bombicina, Gossipina, Cutunea, Silena. A distinction from linen paper was not yet necessary. In the manufacture of the cotton paper, raw cotton was originally used. We first find paper from rags mentioned by Petrus Clusiacensis, 1122 to 1150. Quote, "The Spaniards and the Italians learned the manufacture of this paper from the Arabians. The most celebrated factories were at Jativa, Valencia, Toledo, besides Fabriano in the March of Ancona." End quote. In Germany, the use of this material did not become very extended, whether it came from Italy or Spain. Therefore, the further this preparation spread from the East and the adjoining countries, the more necessity there was that linen should take the place of cotton. A document of Kaufbeuren on linen paper in the year 1318 is of very doubtful genuineness. Bodman considers the oldest pure linen paper to be of the year 1324, but up to 1350 much mixed paper was used. All carefully written manuscripts of great antiquity show by the regularity of their lines that they must have been ruled, even though no traces of the ruled lines can be distinguished. To make the lines they used a thin piece of lead, a ruler, and a pair of compasses to mark the distances. In old writings the ink is very black or brown, but while there has been more writing since the 13th century, the color of the ink is often gray or yellowish, and sometimes quite pale, showing that it contains iron. All this affords convincing proof that the manuscript before us belongs to the middle of the 13th century, written with clear black letters between fine lines carefully traced with lead. The color of the ink shows decidedly that it does not contain iron. By these evidences, the date given, 1256, is satisfactorily proved, and it is impossible to assign any later date. Therefore, all suspicion of modern deception vanishes. The language is very old Fries, still older and purer than the Fries Rechtbook, or Old Fries laws, differing from that both in form and spelling, so that it appears to be an entirely different dialect, and shows that the locality of the language must have been, as it was spoken, between the Vlie and the Scheldt. The style is extremely simple, concise, and unembarrassed, resembling that of ordinary conversation, and free in the choice of the words. The spelling is also simple and easy, so that the reading of it does not involve the least difficulty, and yet with all its regularity so unrestricted that each of the separate writers who have worked at the book has his own peculiarities, arising from the changes in pronunciation in a long course of years which naturally must have happened, as the last part of the work is written 5 centuries after the first. As a specimen of antiquity in language and writing, I believe I may venture to say that this book is unique of its kind. The writing suggests an observation which may be of great importance. The Greeks know and acknowledge that their writing was not their own invention. They attribute the introduction of it to Cadmus, a Phoenician. The names of their oldest letters, from alpha to tau, agree so exactly with the names of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, with which the Phoenician will have been nearly connected, that we cannot doubt that the Hebrew was the origin of the Phoenician. But the form of their letters differs so entirely from that of the Phoenician and Hebrew writing that in particular no connection can be thought of between them. Whence, then, have the Greeks derived the form of their letters? From Thet Bok Thera Adel Folstar, the book of Adela's followers, we learn that in the time when Cadmus is said to have lived, about 16 centuries before Christ, a brisk trade existed between the Frisians and the Phoenicians, whom they named Cadhimar, or dwellers on the coast. The name Cadmus comes too clear to the word Cadhimar for us not to believe that Cadmus simply meant a Phoenician. Further on, we learn that about the same time, a priestess of the castle in the island of Walcheren, Minerva, who is also called Nihellenia, had settled in Attica at the head of a Frisian colony and had founded a castle at Athens. Also, from the accounts written on the walls of Varaburg, that the Finns likewise had a writing of their own, a very troublesome and difficult one to read, and that, therefore, the Tyrians and the Greeks had learned the writing of Phrygia. By this representation, the whole thing explains itself, and it becomes clear whence comes the exterior resemblance between the Greek and the old Frese writing, which Caesar also remarked among the Gauls, as likewise in what manner the Greeks acquired and retained the names of the Finn and the forms of the Frese writing.